Alright, so we're out at the beautiful Banner Range here today. We're going to be taking a look at the Ruger SR9C. We're going to have to contend with some background noise at times, so let's see what we can do. Okay, we have our target set up at 5 yards. Our left-hand target, we are going to shoot the Ruger SR9C. For comparison's sake, I brought along today the Glock G48. We're going to shoot that at our right-hand set of targets today. Let's start with our SR9C. We're going to do 2 magazines. The first 10 we'll do in a two-handed grip. Our next 10 we'll do the first 3 in a two-handed grip, and then we'll transition to the next 4 right-handed, the last 4 left-handed. Here we go. As you can see, the loaded chamber indicator up indicates the firearm is loaded. These are the factory 3-dot white sights on here as well. Been a while since I fired this firearm. Always enjoyed it though. For this next 10, we're doing 3 shots with the two-handed grip, 4 shots with the right hand, and because I'm bad at math, attempted 4 shots with the left hand. Doesn't work out too well in a 10-shot magazine. Let's go. A little high on those, but they're on the silhouette. And let's see if we can do what we can do with our G48. This also has a 10-round capacity with the magazines I brought here today. Group is not quite as tight, but all our shots are on the target. Let's see how we do on our next set here. Looking at the target on the left from the Ruger SR9C, we have what I'm going to call a very good group for our initial group from that firearm here today. The group on our right from our Glock G48, I'm going to say is a comparable group. Now before you whoa yeah but me on that one, I have a reason for why I consider that a comparable group that we're going to discuss here in just a moment when I get to the SR9C breakdown. The Ruger SR9C is a compact 9mm double-stack magazine-fed pistol that is striker fire. It's 6.85 inches long, 4.61 inches high, 1.27 inches wide, and weighs in at 23.4 ounces. It has a 3.5-inch stainless steel barrel. Now you might see me refer to my notes a few times throughout this. This firearm is quite feature-rich. The frame on the SR9 series pistols, which includes the SR9C, is a glass-packed nylon frame, and they typically have an ambidextrous thumb safety, which is on both sides. You don't have to change it over, it is on both sides. You have an ambidextrous safety available. They also have a ambidextrous, you don't need to reverse it, it's on both sides, magazine release. Now while the frame on the SR9 series of firearms are the polymer frame, which do not have removable or replaceable grip panels, they do have a reversible back strap So if you do need a slightly different, maybe wider, longer grip, you can reverse that back strap and see if that'll work for you. The SR9C has forward slide serrations. The SR9C has the standard 3 white dot sights that came equipped on the full-size SR9 firearm, and much like the SR9, it can accept most of those accessories, the sights and many of the magazines. It can hold the same 17-round magazines if you so desire, and there was even a grip sleeve available for those 17-round magazines so they weren't so finger pinching on you. If you know, those who have shot it without the grip sleeve know what I'm talking about. The factory 3 white dot sights that came on the SR9C are adjustable for windage and elevation at the rear, and you could also, I guess, technically slightly drift that front sight if you needed to. And additionally, there's also the attachment rail at the front of the firearm, so you could have a laser, a light, or a combination attachment if you so desire on there. And in fact, for many years I had a combination laser light on this SR9C that we're shooting here today. Now, some other mentionables on the SR9 family of firearms are the SR9 was the first sort of full-size large caliber firearm that was striker fired, produced for the public by Ruger. Produced in 2007 up until about 2017. Now the SR9C, for a little bit after discontinuation, there were some distributor exclusives that were available, though from what I can tell, that's now no longer the case and it is discontinued. In my not an expert opinion, I would say the SR9 family of firearms were Ruger's attempt, or first attempt, to compete on the striker-fired pistol market with manufacturers like Glock. And I think the SR9 family were attempts to be direct competitors to the firearms like the Glock 26, the Glock 19, and the Glock 17. And I think they tried to compete in some ways with some additional features that Glock really never has had available to the general public, at least where I live. And that's things like the ambidextrous thumb safety, the loaded chamber indicator, the striker cocked visual and tactile indicator. I don't know of any other firearm besides Ruger that does that, though I'm sure there are others. I'm unaware of them. Now, it is very similar to a Glock in that, in my opinion, on the grip angle and the bore axis with regard to where that's at on the shooter's hand, and they shoot very similar in that regard. Now, I mentioned when we first were looking at the sights here just a moment ago that I had an explanation for why I shoot the Glock a little lower than the SR9C. And what that comes down to is on one of the firearms you have what I call the 6 o'clock low sights, and the other, I believe they call it the combat sights, where you would put your sights sort of halfway over your target. I'm not sure the proper way to phrase it other than to say 6 o'clock low versus combat target sights. And I forget which is which, and on the Glock G48 I default to doing 6 o'clock low, and it is the one that is the combat sights. So that is why my shots often start low, and then when I remember that it has the combat sights, I then adjust, and we see our shots get better on target. We have covered the G48 in a few videos here in the past, and we're really not going to go over its measurements here today for a few different reasons. One of them being, it's not the G26, G19, or G17. For us, it's really just, if this was a movie, we would be casting for generic Glock. And it's generic Glock that shows up for us anytime we cast for generic Glock. If you close your good eye, you squint, you look to the side, in our opinion, it can pass for just about any of the 9mm family of Glock firearms, which is why that's how we represent it in these videos. We're not too serious. It's close enough for our purposes. Let's move on. The range was quite noisy here today, so for some of these I am going to narrate outside of the range portion to account for that. In this next set of video clips, what we are going to do is we are going to shoot at both targets with each firearm, doing a left, right, left, right, left, right, sort of alternating shots in a slow, seeing how easily we can move from one target to the next. Okay, let's redo our left, right, 10 shots with our G48 with fresh targets here, aiming at the head zone. Now, one thing that is going to be slightly different this time is we have pushed the targets back a bit, so they're not at the same 5 yards they were last time. That's just the nature of at the public range. Here we go. 10 shots, starting at the left-hand head zone of the silhouette target. We're going to alternate left, right. Ooh, that was way low. Oh. My first 2 shots were way low. I think that's the difference in the sight picture between how these 2 firearms are set up. Let's do it now with our SR9C again. I feel like pretty good results the last time. Let's see if we do any different this time. Starting on the left again. Looking at our results from the left-right challenge with the SR9C and the G48 at 5 yards and 7 yards, I can't really tell a difference in the performance one way or the other in these targets, so we're going to call it a wash. Let's move on to the double tap challenge now. 10 double taps, here we go. This time with the SR9C, and see if we can hit the target at all with double tap with this firearm. Left-hand target. Our brass is ricocheting off the column, but I feel like SR9C tore it up. For the results of our double tap test, I'm going to say while we have fairly comparable results between the 2 firearms, I'm going to say the SR9C won for me. And that's more of a personal preference, practice, sort of my preference in firearms thing than anything else. Now these firearms are, as I've said, very similar, down to even a very similar length of trigger pull, the way that the triggers reset, where the triggers reset. The triggers are very similar on these firearms. I think my G48 off my scale is around 3.5 pounds. The SR9C off my scale is right around 4 pounds. They're very similar striker fire triggers. Really, the only major differences between them would be about 3 ounces of weight and a slight difference in barrel length and sight picture. Of those 3, I believe it's about the 3 ounces of weight difference, which is why we see the slightly better double tap groups here today more than anything else between these 2 firearms. There is one additional factor that I think does come into play here, but I think that's more of a personal preference, me thing, than a firearms thing, and we're going to discuss that in the conclusion. Before we get to the conclusion, how about a little more range time? What we're going to do is we're going to do one-handed, right hand 5 shots, left hand 5 shots at our 8-inch splatter target. That's on me. That's definitely on me. Okay, right hand, terrible one-handed at this distance. Let's see if geez, that's a good one.
Goes on the top. Bring it around here.
My first two were really good, and then it was all downhill from there.
Bring it around. Oh, I see.
Looking at the targets after our one-handed competition, I would say they are fairly comparable, though I want to call shenanigans. A very animated discussion erupted in the next lane over right as I begun the SR9C challenge, which I believe threw my shots off, but the shots are what they are. If I can ignore a ton of gunfire in the lane next to me, I should be able to ignore a discussion in the next lane over. So the targets speak for themselves. We're going to say the results are comparable. They are what they are. Targets don't lie. Ball don't lie. Targets don't lie. Let's get to the conclusion of our video here today. We're going to start with the negatives. And it's probably a short list, though I do have a few of them. The main negative I have with the Ruger SR9C or any of the Ruger SR9 pistols is they have a magazine disconnect. And it's a deceptive magazine disconnect in my opinion. The reason I say that is on, say, my Ruger LCP2 22 long rifle, which also has a magazine disconnect. When the magazine is disconnected, removed from the firearm, you cannot pull the trigger on the firearm. It's inoperable. It moves a fractional amount, doesn't do anything else. On my Ruger SR9C, which also has a magazine disconnect, when you pull the trigger, the striker fire action fires, or at least it appears to. If you read the manual, Ruger actually says that you should not fire the firearm with a magazine not in the firearm. They do not recommend it. Though they do say that with the magazine, an empty magazine in the firearm, you can safely dry fire the firearm. I think that's quite curious. In my opinion, I would very much prefer to be able to dry fire the firearm. If I do dry fire practice, I would want to dry fire practice with the magazine not in the firearm. To me, that's a safety thing. I want to make sure that I don't have a magazine, even if it's unloaded, I don't want to have a magazine anywhere close to my firearm when I'm doing my dry fire practice. Again, that's just me. Now, I did verify that at the range today. I did load the firearm. I then disconnected the magazine, removed it completely, tried to fire the firearm. It would not fire with a round in the chamber with a magazine not in the firearm. Now, I can see both sides of this equation, and there are, I guess, equal merit to both sides. If you're someone that say has kids and you want to verify that your firearm cannot work at all, you lock up your firearm and your magazines as far apart as possible with separate keys and adamantium bolts or whatever, to where your kids or whatever can't possibly put a magazine in your firearm and there ain't no danger happening. Conversely, If you are someone who carries your firearm, who has to rely on it, who maybe has to fire more rounds than say the average FBI test is going to say you need in self-defense and need to reload, if you got caught in the middle of a tactical reload, for example, you would be shit out of luck. Without a magazine in the firearm, you cannot fire it, which in my opinion, that's a negative. Other people who say have kids want that adamantium farthest apart fault situation, positive. And I'm going to allow for both situations. I think it can be a positive or a negative depending on who you are. And I really wish that Ruger allowed for you to buy that option without having to modify it yourself. Now you can modify the Ruger SR series to undo that magazine disconnect. I don't recommend it. I don't know what Ruger's stance would be on it. It's not something we're going to comment on or recommend as a result. I don't know what it would do as far as safety goes, but it is a possibility. Now, one thing that will surprise probably many viewers of this channel is the Ruger SR9C that we're shooting here today was my first 9mm pistol ever. It's the first one I owned. And in fact, I got it used. I didn't get it new. It came to me used. Now, it was lightly used, but it was still used, hence used gun of the month. And I have put many, many, many rounds through it since then. For more than a year after I got it, it was my daily carry. And when I got it used because frankly, way back then, it was what I could afford. Could I afford something more? No. A used Ruger SR9C was what I could afford back then. And my honest assessment since then would be that this firearm has performed 100% for me since then. It's never had a failure, not once. I fired every ammunition possible I could find through it, questionable reloads that I did myself. It has performed without fail, and it's been accurate and, of course, certainly reliable. And there's firearms plenty more expensive that I can't say that about, which is kind of a shame, to be honest. Now, in my not an expert opinion, it's a shame that Ruger has discontinued this Ruger SR9C firearm. It's an excellent firearm in my not an expert opinion. It's very, very, very reliable, and I think it can be very accurate, especially if you are practiced with it. As we've seen here today, I did very good hitting the target with it, and I probably haven't shot this firearm in more than a year because I rarely shoot this firearm at this point. That's not because it isn't an excellent firearm, but just because we shoot so many other things that it's hard for me to remember to circle back to this Ruger SR9C at this point. It has not aged well. Back when it first came out, Ruger touted the Ruger SR as one of, if not the thinnest double stack 9mm pistols available on the market. Well, since then, now we have the micro double stack compact pistols, which are quite a bit thinner, and well, if I'm honest, they don't shoot quite a bit better. While the Ruger SR9C is discontinued at this point, and probably has been for a couple years now, it is still one that I routinely see on my gun store circuit on the used gun shelf. And I think it can be an excellent buy for, frankly, most people. While it's not the most concealable, compact, double stack 9mm ever, especially compared to the micro compact double stack options of today, it is one that, compared to those micro compact double stack options, I think shoots much better if you can afford to carry that little bit of extra size and weight that goes along with it. Now, it's not quite as customizable as, say, some of the Glock options that it tried to compete with, but it is one where I think you need to ask the question, do you need to? As far as a concealed carry personal protection home defense option, the Ruger SR9C I think has a very good trigger pull weight, a very easy to use trigger, a very easy to use firearm that gets on target quickly, And I think it's frankly easy to use. It's easy to carry, it's easy to shoot, it's extremely reliable in my experience, and it's hard to go wrong with. So I think today, even with it being discontinued, if you can find one that's at even close to a good price, I would not be afraid to jump on it. They are very good firearms. Now, one area that I want to comment on the Ruger SR9C versus, say, the Glock G48 or the Glock style pistol is in the sight picture and how easy I find it personally to sight the firearm compared to the Glock style firearm. To me, the way the trapezoidal, we're going to call it sight, on the Ruger SR9 lines up compared to the more boxy-ish 90'd off sights on the Glock, for me it's very easy and natural to find the sights on the SR9 style pistol compared to the Glock. And I think that explains some of the sight deviation we see here today. To me, it's almost natural when I bring up the Ruger SR9 firearm to where I can find those sights without even, almost effortlessly, we'll say, compared to the Glock that we shot here today. With the Ruger, it took way less effort for me personally to find the sights and get on target compared to the Glock that I shot here today. Now that's just my personal opinion. That's not how you, say, are going to shoot the firearm unless you're very much like me. That's just me personally. Again, that's one of those things that I mentioned. It was a personal preference thing, not a firearms related thing. Well, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching. And as always, have a good day. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Freddy gets his biscuits.